Voluntaryist Academy. Please subscribe. Voluntaryist Academy is an educational platform dedicated to the principles of non-aggression, self-ownership, and the ethical philosophy of voluntarism. Here, we reject the mythology of political authority and embrace the timeless truth that all human interaction should be grounded in consent and moral integrity. Through rigorous study, in-depth courses, and accessible materials, Voluntaryist Academy equips individuals with the tools to critically examine the foundations of coercive systems and to replace them with voluntary, peaceful alternatives rooted in natural law. So whether you are new to these ideas or looking to deepen your understanding, Voluntaryist Academy provides a structured path to intellectual freedom, ethical consistency, and personal sovereignty. Welcome. Explore the curriculum, challenge false assumptions, learn to live free. Streaming every Saturday night. My name is James Cordiner, and we're going to start a new series tonight, or redoing an old series, whatever you want to look at it as. And that series is going to be on Socratic logic by Peter Kreeft. And we're going to be reading this book for the next many, many weeks. And we're going to get into it now. So Socratic logic, a logic text using Socratic method, Platonic questions, and Aristotelian principles by Peter Kreeft. This is the edition 3.1 that I'll be reading. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And without any further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. And so here we go. We're going to scroll right through the contents, table of contents. Preface. This book is a dinosaur. Once upon a time in Middle Earth, two things were different. One being most students learned the old logic. And two, they could think, read, write, organize, and argue much better than they can today. If you believe these two things are not connected, you probably believe storks bring babies. It is time to turn back the clock. Contrary to the cliche, you can turn back the clock, and you should whenever it is keeping bad time. I learned that and thousands of other very logical paradoxes from G.K. Chesterton, the 20th century Socrates. As I write this, it is the last Sunday of October, and we have just turned back our clocks from daylight savings time to standard time. This is a parable for what I am convinced we must do in logic. The prevailing symbolic and mathematical logic is a logic that a computer can do. It is artificial, like daylight savings time. It is very useful where there is already much intelligence in the minds of geniuses, especially in science, just as daylight savings time is very useful in the summer when there is a plenitude of sunlight. But as the sunlight of clear thinking, writing, reading, and debating decreases in our society, it is time to make progress by turning back the clock from daylight savings time to real time, real language, real people, and the real world. The old Socratic, Platonic, Aristotelian logic is simply more effective than the new symbolic logic in helping ordinary people in dealing with those four precious things. This text differs from nearly all other logic texts in print in the three ways suggested by the subtitle. It does this by apprenticing itself to the first three great philosophers in history, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Do we have better ones today? Number one, no other logic text explicitly sets out to train little Socrateses. Number two, no other logic text in print is so explicitly philosophical in a classical, Platonic way. And number three, and only two or three other shorter, formal logic texts bypass mathematical and symbolic logic for the Aristotelian logic of real people, real inquiry, and real conversations. The only other alternative to symbolic logic available today is informal logic, or rhetoric. This is useful, but less exact and less philosophical. You can get this PDF at voluntaristacademy.com/library. Introduction. Section 1. What good is logic? This section will give you 13 good reasons why you should study logic. Number 1. Order. You may be wondering, what can I do with logic? The answer is that logic can do something with you. Logic builds the mental habit of thinking in an orderly way. Of course, in logic will do this for you even if you forget every detail in it. Which you won't, by the way. Just as learning Latin will make you more habitually aware of the structure of language, even if you forget every particular Latin word and rule. No course is more practical than logic. For no matter what you are thinking about, you are thinking, and logic orders and clarifies your thinking. No matter what your thought's content, it will be clearer when it has a more logical form. The principles of thinking logically can be applied to all thinking and to every field. Logic studies the forms or structures of thought. Thought has form and structure too, just as the material universe does. Thought is not like a blank screen that receives its form only from the world that appears on it, as a movie screen receives a movie. This book will show you the basic forms or structures and the basic laws or rules of thought, just as a course in physics or chemistry shows you the basic forms and laws of matter. The second reason is power. Logic has power, the power of proof, and thus persuasion. Any power can be either rightly used or abused. This power of logic is rightly used to win the truth and defeat error. It is wrongly used to win the argument and defeat. 1. Making numbered lists like this is the first and simplest way we learn to order the buzzing and blooming confusion that is our world. Children and primitive peoples and David Letterman love to make lists. Thus, we find 12-step programs and the 10 Commandments and the 7 Wonders of the World, the 5 Pillars of Islam, the 4 Noble Truths, and the 3 things more miserable than a wet chicken. To make a list is to classify many things under one general category, and at the same time to distinguish these things by assigning them different numbers. Your opponent argument is to truth as fishing is to fish, or war to peace, or courtship to marriage. The power of logic comes from the fact that it is the science and art of argument. In the words of an old logic text, logic hath its name from logos ratio, because it is an art which teacheth the reason to reason and discourse. Thus beginneth Thomas Good's 1677, A Brief English Tract of Logic. Dialectic, otherwise known as logic, is an art which teacheth to dispute well. This is the first sentence of a 1574 book called Logic by Peter Ramus Martyr. Logic is so powerful that it can be dangerous to life. Socrates, the father of philosophy and the model for this book, was literally martyred for being logical by the city of Athens, the ancient world's most famous and civilized democracy. The Apology, which is Socrates' swan song, is his defense of philosophizing, of his life of logical inquiry. It is one of the greatest speeches ever made. No one should be allowed to die without reading it. Whether you use logic for right or wrong ends, it is a powerful tool. No matter what your thoughts, ends, or goal or purpose may be, it will attain that end more effectively if it is clearer and more logical. Even if you want to do something with logic rather than let logic do something with you, even if you want to deceive others, or snow them, or toy with them, you need to know logic in order to be a successful sophist. You must be a real logician even to be a fake. Reading. Number 3, reading. Logic will help you with all your other courses, for logic will help you read any book more clearly and effectively. If you are always going to be reading books, Book Arc, the single most effective technological invention in the history of education. On the basis of over 40 years of full-time college teaching of almost 20,000 students at 20 different schools, I am convinced that one of the reasons for the steep decline in students' ability is the decline in the teaching of traditional logic. Mortimer Adler's classic, How to Read a Book, is based on the traditional common sense logic of the 3 acts of the mind that you will learn in this book. If I were a college president, I would require every incoming freshman to read Adler's book and pass a test on it before taking other courses. The most important points of that book are summarized in this book on page 355. Number 4, writing. Logic will also help you to write more clearly and effectively. For clear writing and clear thinking are a package deal. The presence or absence of either one brings the presence or absence of the other. Muddled writing fosters muddled thinking, and muddled thinking fosters muddled writing. Clear writing fosters clear thinking, and clear thinking fosters clear writing. Common sense expects this, and scientific studies confirm it. Writing skills have declined dramatically in the 40 years or so since symbolic logic has replaced Aristotelian logic, and I am convinced this is no coincidence. There is nothing more effective than traditional logic in training you to be a clear, effective, and careful writer. It is simply impossible to communicate clearly and effectively without thinking clearly and effectively. And that means logic. Number 5, happiness. In a small but significant way, logic can even help you attain happiness. We all seek happiness all the time because no matter what else we seek it because we think it will be a means to happiness or a part of happiness. Consider for ourselves or for those we love. Either for ourselves or for those we love. And no one seeks happiness for any other end. No one says he wants to be happy in order to be rich or wise or healthy. But we seek riches or wisdom or health in order to be happy. How can logic help us to attain happiness? Here is a very logical answer to that question. Number 1, when we attain what we desire, we are happy. Number 2, in whatever we desire, whether heaven or a hamburger, it is more likely that we will attain it if we think more clearly. Number 3, and logic helps us to think more clearly, leading to number 4, therefore logic helps us to be happy. No other things that make us happy are contradicted or threatened by logic, though many people think they are. Beauty, for instance. There is nothing illogical about the beauty of a sunset, or a storm, or a baby. Take heroism, or even holiness. What's illogical about being very, very good? Even fantasy is not illogical. In fact, according to the greatest master of this art, J.R.R. Tolkien, he said, fantasy is a rational, not an irrational activity. Creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, on a recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. So upon logic was founded the nonsense that displays itself in the tales and rhymes of Lewis Carroll. If men really could not distinguish between frogs and men, fairy stories about frog kings would not have arisen, end quote. That's from On Fairy Stories by Tolkien. The reference to Lewis Carroll, who is the author of Alice in Wonderland, among many other things, is particularly telling. Lewis Carroll was a pseudonym or a pen name for Reverend Charles Ludwig Dodgson, an Oxford mathematician who wrote a textbook on logic. In fact, he was working on Volume 2 when he died. Number 6, religious faith. All religions require faith. Is logic the ally or enemy of faith? Even religion, though it goes beyond logic, cannot go against it. If it did, it would literally be unbelievable. Some with defined faith as believing what you know isn't true. But we simply cannot believe an idea to be true that we know has been proved to be false by a valid logical proof. It is true that faith goes beyond what can be proved by logical reasoning alone. That is why believing in any religion is a free personal choice, and some make that choice while others do not, while logical reasoning is equally compelling for all. However, logic can aid faith in at least 3 ways, and thus in faith significantly increases human happiness. As most psychologists believe, it logically follows that logic can significantly increase happiness. First, logic can often clarify what is believed and define it. Second, logic can deduce the necessary consequences of the belief and apply it to difficult situations. For instance, it can show that if it is true, as the Bible says, that, quote, God works all things together for good for those who love him, end quote, from Romans book 8, 8:28, book 8, section 28, then it must also be true that even seemingly terrible things like pain, death, and martyrdom will work together for good, and this can put these terrible things in a new light and give us a motive for enduring them with hope. Third, even if logical arguments cannot prove all that faith believes, they can give firmer reasons for faith than feeling, desire, mood, fashion, family or social pressure, conformity, or inertia. For instance, if you believe the idea mentioned above, that, quote, all things work together for good for those who love God, end quote, simply because you feel good today, you will probably stop believing it tomorrow when you feel miserable. Or if you believe it only because your friends or family do, you will probably stop believing it when you are away from your friends or family. But if you have logical grounds for believing this, even though those grounds are not a compelling proof, they can keep your faith more firmly anchored during storms of changing feelings, fashions, friends, etc. How could there be logical grounds for such a belief as this, that all things work together for good? That seems to contradict common sense and experience. Some logical grounds might be the following. This conclusion can be logically deduced from four premises which are much easier to believe. Number one, that God exists. Number two, that God is the creator of the universe and thus all powerful. And number three, that God is the source of all goodness and thus all good. And finally, four, that God is the source of all design and order in the universe and thus all wise. A God who is all powerful is in control of everything he created. A God who is all good wills only good to everything he created. And a God who is all wise knows what is ultimately for the best for everyone and everything he created. So to deny that all things are foreseen and allowed by God for the ultimate good of those he loves, i.e., wills goodness to, is to deny either God's existence, power, goodness, or wisdom. In a logical argument, you cannot deny the conclusion without denying a premise, and you cannot admit the premises without admitting the conclusion. The logical chains of argument can thus bind our minds, and through them also even our feelings, to a certain degree, to God and to hope and to happiness. And if these four more basic premises of God's existence, power, goodness, and wisdom are questioned, logic may also help to establish them by further reasonable arguments, e.g., the traditional arguments for the existence of God. And perhaps logic can give good grounds for the premises of those arguments too. The point is not that logic can prove religious beliefs. That would dispense with the need for faith. But that it can strengthen them, and thus also the happiness that goes with them. And if it does not, if clear, honest, logical thinking leads you to believe something you used to believe, like Santa Claus, then that is progress too. For truth should trump even happiness. If we are honest and sane, we want not just any happiness, but true happiness. Number 7, wisdom. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. That is the etymological definition of philosophy. Although logic alone cannot make you wise, it can help. For logic is one of philosophy's main instruments. Logic is to philosophy what telescopes are to astronomy, or microscopes to biology, or math to physics. You can't be very good at physics if you're very bad at math, and you can't be very good at philosophy if you're very bad at logic. Number 8, democracy. There are even crucial social and political reasons for studying logic. As a best-selling modern logic text says, quote, the success of a democracy depends, in the end, on the reliability of the judgments we citizens make, and hence upon our capacity and determination to weigh arguments and evidence rationally, end quote. As Thomas Jefferson said, quote, in a republican nation whose citizens are to be led by reason and persuasion and not by force, the art of reasoning becomes of the first importance, end quote. Narrators comment here. Kreeft is wrong about that. And we'll cover that in the future. Okay. But this is a very, very, very important text on logic. And you'll see why in the coming weeks. Number 9, defining logic's limits. Does logic have limits? Yes, but we need logic to recognize and define logic's limits. Logic has severe limits. We need much more than logic even in our thinking. For instance, we need intuition too, but logic helps us to recognize this distinction. In our lives, logical arguments are always embedded in a human context that is interpersonal, emotional, intuitive, and assumed rather than proved. And this colors the proper interpretation of a logical argument. For instance, in 1637, Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." 370 years later, a bumper sticker says, "I bitch, therefore I am." The logical form of both arguments is the same, but the contexts are radically different. Descartes was seriously trying to refute skepticism, the belief that we cannot be certain of anything, right, by a purely theoretical argument, while the bumper sticker was making a joke. We laugh at it because we intuitively understand what it means. That it means, don't complain at me bitching. Bitching makes me feel more real, more alive, right? Logical thinking alone cannot know this, but we can know what its limits are. It can distinguish what it can understand from what it can't, like non-logical factors such as humor and feeling and intuition. Testing authority. Number 10, testing authority. We need authority as well as logic. Wrong again, but we need logic to test our authorities. We we need authorities because no individual can discover everything autonomously. We all do, in fact, rely on the human community and therefore on the authority of others: parents, teachers, textbooks, experts, friends, history, and tradition for a surprisingly large portion of what we know, perhaps up to 99% if it can be quantified. And that is another reason we need logic. We need to have good reasons for believing our authorities. For in the end, it is you, the individual, who must decide which authorities to trust. It is obviously foolish to buy from every peddler of ideas that knocks on your mind's door. In fact, it is impossible, because they often contradict each other. Narrator's note here. Seems as though he's not talking about what we just got through with the most dangerous superstition. He seems to be talking about authorities in the sense of not ruling class. But he's obviously correct about that. We do need logic to test authorities. Number 11, recognizing contradictions. One of the things you will learn in this course is exactly what contradiction means, how to recognize it, and what to do with it. Logic teaches us which ideas contradict each other. If we are confused about that, we will be either too exclusive, that is, we will think beliefs logically exclude each other when they do not, or too inclusive. That's to say, we will believe two things that cannot both be true. When we consider two different ideas which seem to contradict each other, we need to know three things. Number one, first of all, we need to know exactly what each one means. Only then can we know whether they really contradict each other or not. Number two, if they do contradict each other, we need to know which one is true and which one is false. And we do this, number three, we do this by finding reasons why one idea is true and the other is false, or another is false. These are the three acts of the mind: understanding a meaning, judging what is true, and reasoning. These are the three parts of logic which you will learn in this course. Number 12, certainty. Logic has, quote unquote, outer limits. There are many things it can't give you, but logic has no, quote unquote, inner limits. Like math, it never breaks down. Just as 2 plus 2 are unfailingly 4, so if A is B and B is C, then A is unfailingly C. Logic is timeless and unchangeable. It is certain. It is not certain that the sun will rise tomorrow. It is only very, very probable. But it is certain that it either will or won't. And it is certain that if it's true that it will, then it's false that it won't. In our fast-moving world, much of what we learn goes quickly out of date. Quote, "He who weds the spirit of the times quickly becomes a widower," end quote, says G.K. Chesterton. But logic never becomes obsolete. The principles of logic are timelessly true. Our discovery of these principles, of course, changes and progresses through history. Aristotle knew more logic than Homer, and we know more than Aristotle, as Einstein knew more physics than Newton, and Newton knew more than Aristotle. What good is logic? Our formulations of these changeless logical principles also change. This book is clearer and easier to read than Aristotle's Organon, written 2,350 years ago, but it teaches the same essential principles. Our applications of the timeless principles of logic to changing things are also changing. The principles of logic apply to many different and changing things, but the principles themselves are unchanging and rigid. They wouldn't work unless they were rigid. When we hear a word like rigid or inflexible, we usually experience an automatic, knee-jerk negative reaction. But a moment's reflection should show us that, though people should not usually be rigid and inflexible, principles have to be. They wouldn't work unless they were rigid. Unless the yardstick is rigid, you cannot use it to measure the non-rigid, changing things in the world, like the height of a growing child. Trying to measure our rapidly and confusingly changing world by a flexible and changing logic instead of an inflexible one is like trying to measure a squirming alligator with a squirming snake. Number 13. Truth. Our last reason for studying logic is the simplest and most important of all. It is that logic helps us find truth, and truth is its own end. It is worth knowing for its own sake. Logic helps us to find truth, though it is not sufficient of itself to find truth. It helps us especially, one, by demanding that we define our terms so that we understand what we mean, and two, by demanding that we give good reasons, arguments, and proofs. These are the two main roads to truth, as you will see more clearly when you read Chapter 2 on the three acts of the mind: understanding, judging, and reasoning. Truth is not found only in, quote, the second act of the mind, end quote, which is judging. The judgment that all men are mortal, but two paths to truth are the first act of the mind, e.g., understanding the meaning of the terms men and mortal, and the third act of the mind, e.g., reasoning that since all men have animal bodies, and whatever has an animal body is mortal, therefore all men are mortal. These are the two main ways logic helps us to find truth. Truth is worth knowing just for the sake of knowing it, because truth fulfills and perfects our minds, which are part of our very essence, our deep, distinctively human core, our very selves. Truth is to our minds what food is to our bodies. Aristotle pointed out 24 centuries ago that there are three reasons for pursuing truth and three corresponding kinds of science, in the older, broader sense of the word sciences, namely, quote, rational explanations through causes, end quote. He called the three kinds of science: 1, productive sciences; 2, practical sciences; and 3, theoretical sciences. Each pursues truth for a different end. The productive sciences, number 1, we want to know about the world so that we can change it, improve it, and make things out of it, like rubber, or roads, or rockets, or robots. This is what Aristotle called productive science, since its end is to produce things. We call it technology, after the Greek word techne, which means approximately, quote-unquote, know-how. Knowing how to make or fix or improve some material thing in the world, right? So productive sciences include things as diverse as engineering, surgery, auto repair, cooking, and cosmetics. The practical sciences is described as: we also want to know about ourselves so that we can change and improve our own lives, or our behavior, or our activities. Aristotle called this practical science, knowledge and practice in action. Practical sciences include ethics and politics, as well as knowing how to do things as diverse as economics, singing, and surfing. And number 3, most of all, we want to know simply in order to know, i.e., to become larger on the inside, as it were, to expand our consciousness. Sciences that pursue this end, Aristotle called theoretical sciences, from the Greek word theoria, which means looking or contemplating. Theoretical does not necessarily mean uncertain or merely hypothetical. Theoretical sciences include such diverse things as physics, biology, theology, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. These all have practical applications and uses, but they are first of all aimed at simply knowing and understanding the truth, even if there is no practical application of it. Many people today think that theoretical sciences are the least important because they are not practical, but Aristotle argued that theoretical sciences were the most important for the same reason that practical sciences were more important than productive sciences, because their payoff is more intimate, their reward closer to home, for they improve our very selves, while practical sciences improve our actions and lives, and productive sciences improve our world. All three are important, but just as our lives are more intimate to us than our external world, so our very selves are even more intimate to us than our lives, our deeds, and certainly more intimate and more important to us than the material things in our world. As a very famous and very practical philosopher argued 20 centuries ago, what does it profit a man to gain the world, the whole world, but lose his own self? It's from the Bible, Mark 8:36. The original meaning of a liberal arts education was this: the study of the truth for its own sake, not only for the sake of what you can do with it or what you can make with it. The term liberal arts comes from Aristotle. He said that just as a man is called free when he exists for his own sake and a slave when he exists for the sake of another man, so these studies are called free, liberal, or liberating, because they exist for their own sake and not for the sake of anything else. Logic will prove very useful to you in many ways, but its most important use is simply to help you see more clearly what is true and what is false. Logic alone will not tell you what is true. It will only aid you in discovering truth. You also need experience to get your premises. Logic can draw your conclusions. Logic will tell you that if all leprechauns are elves and all hobbits are leprechauns, then it necessarily follows that all hobbits are elves. But logic will not tell you whether all leprechauns are elves, or even whether there are even any leprechauns. I once asked my very Irish neighbor whether she believes in leprechauns, and she answered, "Of course not. But they all exist all the same, mind you." Perhaps the Irish should write their own logic textbook. Uh, To have logical clarity and consistency is admirable, but to have only logical clarity and consistency is pitiful. In fact, it is a mark of insanity, as G.K. Chesterton pointed out. He says, "If you argue with a madman, it is extremely probable that you will get to the worst of it. You will get the worst of it, for in many ways, his mind moves all the quicker for not being delayed by the things that go with good judgment. He is not hampered by the sense of humor or charity, or by the dumb certainties of experience. Indeed, the most common phrase for insanity is, in this respect, a misleading one. The madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who has lost everything except his reason. If a man says that he is the rightful king of England, it is no complete answer to say that the existing authorities call him mad. For if he were the king of England, that might be the wisest thing for the existing authorities to do. Or if a man says that he is Jesus Christ, it is no answer to tell him that the world denies his divinity, for the world denied Christ's. His mind moves in a perfect but narrow circle. A small circle is quite as infinite as a large circle, but, though it is quite as infinite, it is not so large. In the same way, the insane explanation is quite as complete as the sane one, but it is not so large. So you are the creator and redeemer of the world, but what a small world it must be. What a little heaven you must inhabit, with angels no bigger than butterflies. How sad it must be to be God, and an inadequate God. Is there really no life fuller and no love more marvelous than yours? How much happier you would be how much more of you there would be if the hammer of a higher god could smash your small cosmos, scattering the stars like spangles, and leave you in the open, free like other men to look up as well as down. Curing a madman is not arguing with a philosopher. It is casting out a devil. The two logics. Blah, blah, blah. This section can be omitted without losing anything you will need later on in the book. It's here both to satisfy and advance the advanced student's curiosity and to sell the approach of this book to prospective teachers who may question its emphasis on Aristotelian rather than symbolic logic by justifying this choice philosophically. So we're going to skip it because should we skip it? Let me know if we should skip this section. I'm going to take a quick break to take a drink of water. 2, 3. All right, we're back. Now I cleared the frog out of my throat. All right, so almost 400 years before Christ, Aristotle wrote the world's first logic textbook. Actually, it was 6 short books, which collectively came to be known as the organon, or instrument. From then until 1913, when Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead published Principia Mathematical, the first classic of mathematical or symbolic logic, all students learned Aristotelian logic, the logic taught in this book. The only other new logic for 24 centuries was an improvement on the principles of inductive logic by Francis Bacon's Novum Organum, which translates to New Organon in the 17th century, and another by John Stuart Mill in the 19th century. So inductive reasoning could be very roughly and inadequately defined as reasoning from concrete particular instances known by experience, while deduction reasons from general principles. So induction yields only probability, while deduction yields certainty. Quote, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are mortal, therefore probably all men are mortal, end quote, is an example of inductive reasoning. Quote, all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, end quote, is an example of deductive reasoning. So do we see the difference there between inductive and deductive? Good. Today, nearly all logic textbooks use the new mathematical or symbolic logic as a kind of new language system for deductive logic. It is not a new logic. Logical principles are unchangeable, like the principles of algebra. It is more like changing from Roman numerals to Arabic numerals. There are at least 3 reasons for this change. The first being, the first and most important one is that the new logic really is superior to the old in efficiency for expressing many long and complex arguments, as Arabic numerals are to Roman numerals, or a digital computer to an analog computer, or writing in shorthand to writing in longhand. However, longhand is superior to shorthand in other ways. Like it has more beauty and elegance, it is intelligible to more people, and it gives a more personal touch. That is why most people prefer longhand most of the time, as most beginners prefer simpler computers or even pens. It is somewhat similar to logic. Most people, they argue in longhand, i.e., like using ordinary language. And Aristotelian logic stays close to ordinary language. That is why Aristotelian logic is more practical for beginners. Even though symbolic language is superior in sophistication, it depends on common sense logic as its foundation and root. Thus, you will have a firmer foundation for all advanced logics if you first master the most basic logic. Strong roots are the key. Strong roots are the key to healthy branches and leaves for any tree. Any farmer knows that the way to get a better fruit is to tend to the roots, not the fruits. This is only an analogy. Analogies do not prove anything. That is a common fallacy. They are only illuminated and they only illuminate and illustrate, but it is an illuminating analogy indeed. Modern symbolic logic is mathematical logic. Modern symbolic logic has been developed primarily by mathematicians and mathematical applications in mind. This is from one of its defenders, not one of its critics, named Henry C. Baker. I think that's supposed to say Barclay. Anyways, mathematics is a wonderful invention for saving time and empowering science, but it is not very useful in most ordinary conversations, especially philosophical conversations. The more important the subject matter, the less relevant mathematics seems. It's its forte is quantity, not quality. Mathematics is the only totally clear, utterly unambiguous language in the world, yet it cannot say anything very interesting about anything very important. Compare the exercises in a symbolic logic text with those in this text. How many are taken from the great books? How many are from conversations you could have had in real life? Number 2, what are we going over here again? Oh, the changes, yeah. The changes, Number 2, a second reason for the popularity of symbolic logic is probably its more scientific and exact form. The very artificiality of its language is a plus for its defenders, but it is a minus for ordinary people. In fact, Ludwig Wittgenstein, probably the most influential philosophical logician of the 20th century, admitted in Philosophical Investigations that, quote, because of the basic differences between natural and artificial languages, often such translations between natural language sentences and artificial symbolic language are not even possible in principle. He goes on to say uh, let's see, Stephen N. Thomas said in Practical Reasoning in Natural Language that many logicians now agree that the methods of symbolic logic are of little practical usefulness in dealing with much reasoning and encountered in real life situations and in philosophy. However, let's see, who said this? Andrew Bachhuber, in Introduction to Logic, said, however helpful symbolic logic may be as a tool of the sciences, it is relatively useless as a tool of philosophy. Philosophy aims at insight into principles and into the relationship of conclusions to the principles from which they are derived. Symbolic logic, however, does not aim at giving such insight. Okay. Number 3, but the reason for the change, third reason for the change here, but there is a third reason for the popularity of symbolic logic among philosophers, which is more substantial, for it involves a very important difference in philosophical belief. The old Aristotelian logic was often scorned by 20th century philosophers because it rests on two commonsensical but unfashionable philosophical presuppositions. The technical names for them are epistemological realism and metaphysical realism. These two positions were held by the vast majority of all philosophers for over 2,000 years, roughly from Socrates to the 18th century, and are still held by most ordinary people today, since they seem so commonsensical, but they were not held by many of the influential philosophers of the past 3 centuries. The following summary should not scare off beginners. It is much more abstract and theoretical than most of the rest of this book. The first of these two presuppositions, the epistemological realism, is the belief that the object of human reason, when reason is working naturally and rightly, is objective reality as it really is. That human reason can know objective reality and can sometimes know it with certainty. That when we say, quote, 2 apples plus 2 apples must always be 4 apples, or that apples grow on trees, we are saying something true about the universe, not just how we think or about how we choose to use symbols and words. Today, many philosophers are skeptical of this belief and call it naive, largely because of two 18th century quote-unquote Enlightenment philosophers named David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Hume inherited from his predecessor John Locke the fatal assumption that the immediate object of human knowledge is our own ideas rather than objective reality. Locke naively assumed that we could know that these ideas corresponded to objective reality, somewhat like photographs, but it is difficult to see how we can be sure any photograph accurately corresponds to the real object of which it is a photograph, if the only things we can ever know directly are photographs and not real objects. Hume drew the logical conclusion of skepticism from Locke's premise. Once he limited the objects of knowledge to our own ideas, Hume then distinguished two kinds of propositions expressing these ideas, what he called matters of fact and relations of ideas. What Hume called relations of ideas are essentially what Kant later called analytic propositions, and what logicians now call tautologies. Propositions that are true by definition, true only because their predicate merely repeats all or parts of their subject, like trees are trees, or unicorns are not non-unicorns, or unmarried men are men. What Hume called matters of fact are essentially what Kant called synthetic propositions, propositions whose predicate adds some new information to the subject, like no Englishman is 25 feet tall, or some trees never shed their leaves. And these matters of fact, according to Hume, could be known only by sense observation. Thus, they were always particular, like these two men are bald, rather than universal, like saying all men are mortal. For we do not sense universals, like all men, only particulars, like these two men. Common sense says that we can be certain of some universal truths, like that all men are mortal, and therefore that Socrates is mortal because he is a man. But according to Hume, we cannot be certain of universal truths like all men are mortal, because the only way we can know or come to know them is by generalizing from particular sense experiences. This man is mortal, and that man is mortal, etc. And we cannot sense all men, only some, so our generalization can only be probable. Hume argued that particular facts deduced from these only probable general principles could never be known or predicted with certainty. If it is only probably true that all men are mortal, then it is only probably true that Socrates is mortal. The fact that we have seen the sun rise millions of times does not prove that it will necessarily rise tomorrow. Hume's bottom line conclusion from this analysis is skepticism. There is no certain knowledge of objective reality, what he refers to as matters of fact, only of our own ideas, relations of ideas. That's what Hume calls those. We have only probable knowledge of objective reality. Even scientific knowledge, Hume thought, was only probable, not certain, because science assumes the principles of causality, and this principle, according to Hume, is only a subjective association of our ideas in our minds. Because we have seen a constant conjunction of birds and eggs, because we have seen eggs follow birds so often, we naturally assume that the bird is the cause of the egg. but we do not see causality itself, the causal relation itself between the bird and the egg. And we certainly do not see with our eyes the universal principle of causality. So Hume concluded that we do not really have the knowledge of objective reality that we naturally think we have. We must be skeptics if we are only human beings. I'm sorry, he says Humean beings. That's pretty funny. Kant accepted most of Hume's analysis, but said, in fact, quote, I can't accept I can't accept your skeptical conclusion. This is funny. Um, I can't accept your skeptical. Sorry, guys. I can't accept your skeptical conclusions, but it's for the audio only listeners. Kant is spelled K-A-N-T, and instead of saying C-A-N apostrophe T, he writes K-A-N-T in his book. This is funny. Kant avoided this conclusion by claiming that human knowledge does not fail to do its job because its job is not to conform to objective reality, or what Kant said, called it things in themselves, quote unquote, things in themselves, i.e., to correspond to or copy it. Rather, knowledge constructs or forms reality as an artist constructs or forms a work of art. The knowing subject determines the known object rather than vice versa. Human knowledge does its job very well, but its job is not to learn what is, but to make what is, to form it and structure it and impose meanings on it. Kant distinguished three such levels of imposed meanings. Okay? The two forms of a perception, time and space, 12 abstract logical categories such as causality, necessity, and relation, and the three ideas of pure reason, God, self, and the world. Thus, the world of experience is formed by our knowing it rather than our knowledge being formed by the world. Kant called this idea his Copernican revolution in philosophy. It is sometimes called epistemological idealism or Kantian idealism to distinguish it from epistemological realism. Okay, and so what's epistemology? Epistemology is that division of philosophy which studies human knowing. Okay, the term epistemological idealism is sometimes is used in a different way to mean the belief that ideas rather than objective reality are the objects of our knowledge. In that sense, Locke and Hume are epistemological idealists too. But if we use epistemological idealism to mean the belief that the human idea or knowing or consciousness determines its object rather than being determined by it, then Kant is the first epistemological idealist. The bottom line for logic is that if you agree with either Hume or Kant, logic becomes the mere manipulation of our symbols, not the principles for a true, orderly knowledge of an ordered world. For instance, according to epistemological idealism, general categories like relation or quality or cause or time are only mental classifications we make, not real features of the world that we discover. In such a logic, genus and species means something very different than in Aristotelian logic. They mean only any larger class and smaller subclass that we mentally construct. But for Aristotle, a genus is the general or common part of a thing's real essential nature, like animal is man's genus. And a species is the whole essence, like saying rational animal is man's species. We'll see in chapter 3, sections 2 and 3, more on that. Another place where modern symbolic logic merely manipulates mental symbols, while traditional Aristotelian logic expresses insight into objective reality, is the interpretation of a conditional or hypothetical proposition such as, if it rains, I will get wet. Aristotelian logic, like common sense, interprets this proposition as an insight into real causality. The rain causes me to get wet, right? I am predicting the effect from the cause. But symbolic logic does not allow this commonsensical realistic interpretation. It is skeptical of the naive assumption of epistemological realism. It is skeptical. It is skeptical of the naive assumption. I had an itch. I'm sorry. Let me do. It is skeptical of the naive assumption of epistemological realism that we can know real things like real causality, and this produces the radically anti-commonsensical, or as they so euphemistically, euphemistically, counterintuitive problem of material implication that we'll see on page 23. Besides epistemological realism, Aristotelian logic also implicitly assumes metaphysical realism. Metaphysics is that division of philosophy which investigates what reality is. Epistemology is that division of philosophy which investigates what knowing is. Epistemological realism contends that the object of intelligence is reality. Metaphysical realism contends that reality is intelligible, that it includes a real order, that when we say man is a rational animal, we are not imposing an order on a reality that is really random or chaotic or unknowable, that we are expressing our discovery of order, not our creation of order, that categories like man or animal or thing or attribute are taken from reality into our language and thought, not imposed on reality from our language and thought. Do we see that? See how that works? Right? We're using language to describe reality, okay? Metaphysical realism naturally goes with epistemological realism. Technically, metaphysical realism is the belief that universal concepts correspond with reality, or to reality, that things really have common natures, that universals such as human nature are real, and that we can know them. There are two forms of metaphysical reality. Plato thought that these universals were real things in themselves, while Aristotle thought, more commonsensically, that they were real aspects of things which we mentally abstract from things. Okay? The opposite of realism is nominalism, the belief that universals are only man-made, nomini, which means names. William of Ockham, who lived from 1285 to 1349, is the philosopher who is usually credited or debited with being the founder of nominalism. Aristotelian logic assumes both epistemological realism and metaphysical realism because it begins with the first act of the mind, the act of understanding a universal or a nature or an essence, such as the nature of apple or man. These universals or essences are known by concepts and expressed by what logic calls terms. Then two of these universal terms are related subjects and predicates or of propositions, like saying apples are fruits or saying man is mortal. Aristotle never intended his logic to be a merely formal calculus, like mathematics. He tied logic to his ontology, metaphysics. Thinking in concepts, he's like saying, thinking in concepts presupposes that the world is formed of stable species. Okay, and J. Lenoble said that in one of his books, in a French book that I won't, La Notion d'Expérience. I think I did that good. Anyways, symbolic logic is a set of symbols and rules for manipulating them without needing to know their meaning and content or their relationship to the real world, their truth in traditional, commonsensical sense of truth. A computer can do symbolic logic. It is quantitative, meaning digital, not qualitative. It is reducible to mathematics. The new logic is sometimes called prepositional logic, as well as mathematical logic or symbolic logic, because it begins with propositions, not terms. For terms, like man or apple, express universals or essences or natures, this implicitly assumes metaphysical realism, that universals are real, and epistemological realism, that we can know them as they really are. Okay? Typically, modern philosophers criticize this assumption as naive, but it seems to me that this is a very reasonable assumption and not naive at all. Is it too naive to assume that we know what an apple is? The new logic has no means of saying, and even prevents us from saying, what anything is. So much for the new logic. Sounds a lot like just. Anyway, and if we cease to say it, we will soon cease to think it, and for there will be no holding places in our language for the thought. Language is the house of thought, and homelessness is as life-threatening for thought as it is for people. If we should begin to speak and think only in nominalistic terms, or nominalist terms, this would be a monumental historical change. It would reverse the evolutionary event by which man rose from the animal in gaining the ability to know abstract universals. It would be the mental equivalent of going naked on all fours, living in trees, and eating bugs and bananas. Could monkeys have evolved by natural selection from nominalists? While it may be extremist to suggest it, such a mental devolution is not intrinsically impossible, and changes in logic are not wholly unrelated to it. Already, internet logic, or the logic of spontaneous association by keywords, is replacing genus and species logic, or the logic of an ordered hierarchy of objectively real categories. To most modern minds, those last 7 words sound almost as archaic as alchemy or feudalism. Many criticize them as ideologically dangerous. These critics dislike categories because they feel that phrase is category confusion, by the way. They feel that classifications and universal statements about classes, such as Hittites could not read Hebrew, constitute prejudice, judgmentalism, oppression, or even hate speech. Logic and social change are not unrelated. Not only our logicians, but also our society no longer thinks primarily about the fundamental metaphysical question, the question of what things are, the question of the nature of things. Instead, we think about how we feel about things, about how we can use them, how we see them behave, how they work, how we can change them, or how we can predict and control their behavior by technology. But all of this does not raise us above the animal level in any kind. And in kind, it only does it in degree. The higher animals too have feelings, and they also have things to use and sight. They have action, and even a kind of technology of behavior, prediction, and control. For the art of hunting is an art of predicting and controlling the behavior of other animals. What do we have that no mere animal has? The thing that many modern philosophers vilify. We have abstraction. We have the power to abstract and understand universals. This is the thing traditional logic is founded on. This is the thing symbolic logic ignores or denies. Logic is deeply related to moral and ethical changes in both thought and practice. All previous societies had a strong, nearly universal, and rarely questioned consensus about at least some basic aspects of a, quote, natural moral law, end quote, about what was natural and what was unnatural. There may not have been a greater obedience to this law, but there was a much greater knowledge of it, or agreement about it. Today, especially in the realm of sex, by far the most radically changed area of human life in both belief and practice, our more advanced minds find the old language about unnatural acts not only politically incorrect, but literally incomprehensible because they no longer accept the legitimacy of the very question of the nature of things or of a thing. Issues like homosexuality, contraception, masturbation, pedophilia, incest, divorce, adultery, abortion, and even bestiality are increasingly debated in other terms than the nature of sexuality or the nature of femininity and masculinity. It is not an unthinkable suspicion that one of the most powerful forces driving the new logic is more social than philosophical and more sexual than logical. Symbolic logic naturally fosters utilitarian ethics, which is essentially an ethic of consequences. The fundamental principle of utilitarianism is that an act is good if its probable consequences result in, quote, the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It is an, quote, if then end quote, ethics of calculating consequences, essentially saying the ends justify the means, though that formula is somewhat ambiguous. Symbolic logic fits this perfectly because it is essentially an if then logic, a calculation of logical consequences. Its basic unit is the proposition P or Q, and its basic judgment is if P, then Q. In contrast, Aristotelian logic naturally fosters a natural law ethic, an ethic of universal principles based on the nature of things, especially the nature of man. For its basic unit is the term, a subject, S, or a predicate, P, within a proposition, lowercase p. And its basic judgment is all S is P, a statement of universal truth about the nature of S and P. So all subject is predicate. All right. The very nature of reason itself is understood differently by the new symbolic logic than it was by the traditional Aristotelian logic. Reason used to mean, essentially, quote, all that distinguishes man from the beasts, end quote, including intuition, understanding, wisdom, moral conscience, and aesthetic appreciation, as well as calculation. Reason now usually means only the last of those powers. That is why many thinkers today who seem at first quite sane in other ways actually believe that there is no fundamental difference between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. In other words, you are nothing but a computer plus an ape. Having met some of these people at MIT, I must admit that their self-description sometimes seems quite accurate. Aristotelian logic is not exact enough for the nominalistic mathematical logician, and it is too exact for the pop psychological subjectivist or New Age mystic. Out at sea, there between Scylla and Charybdis, it reveals, by contrast, the double tragedy of modern thought in its alienation between form and matter, structure and content, validity and meaning. This alienated mind was described memorably by C.S. Lewis, who said, the two hemispheres of my brain stood in sharp contrast. And on the one hand, a glib and shallow rationalism, on the other, a many islanded sea of myth and poetry. Nearly all that I loved, I believed subjective. Nearly all that was real, I thought grim and meaningless. That was from Surprised by Joy. Neither mathematical logic nor experience can heal this gap, but Aristotelian logic can. It is thought's soul and body together, yet not confused. Mathematical logic alone is abstract and angelistic, and sense experience and feeling alone is concrete and animalistic. But Aristotelian logic is a human instrument for human beings. Aristotelian logic is also easier, simpler, and therefore time-saving. For example, in a logic textbook misleadingly entitled Practical Reasoning in Natural Language, the author takes 6 full pages of symbolic logic to analyze a simple syllogism from Plato's Republic that proves that justice is not rightly defined as, quote, telling the truth and paying back what is owed, end quote, because returning a weapon to a madman is not justice, but it is telling the truth and paying him back what is owed. Another single syllogism of Hume's takes 8 pages to analyze. I have found that students who are well trained in Aristotelian logic are much better at arguing and at understanding arguments than students who are trained only in symbolic logic. For Aristotelian logic is the logic of the 4 most basic verbal communication arts. They are reading, writing, listening, and speaking. It is the logic of Socrates. And if you want to be a Socrates, this is the logic you should begin with. The old logic is like old classic movies, strong on substance rather than sophistication. The new logic is like typically modern movies, strong on special effects but weak on substance, like theme, character, and plot. Strong on the technological bells and whistles, but weak on the human side. But logic should be a human instrument. Logic was made for man, not man for logic. The problem of material implication. The following issue is quite abstract and difficult, though I shall try to make it as simple as possible. It is included because I believe it shows that, quote, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, end quote, at the very heart of the new logic. Logic is most especially about reasoning or inference, the process of thinking by which we draw conclusions from evidence, moving from one proposition to another. The proposition we begin with is called a premise, and the proposition we move to, or infer, or reason to, is called a conclusion. The simplest and most straightforward kind of reasoning is to move from a true premise, or more usually from a number of true premises together, to a true conclusion. But we can also use false propositions in good reasoning. Since a false conclusion cannot be logically proved from true premises, we can know that if the conclusion is false, then one of the premises must also be false in a logically valid argument. A logically valid argument is one in which the conclusion necessarily follows from its premises. In a logically valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. In an invalid argument, this is not so. So here we go. Here's an example of a valid argument. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's a valid argument. Let's go over an argument that's not valid. Dogs have 4 legs, and Lassie has 4 legs. Therefore, Lassie is a dog. That is not a valid argument. The conclusion, Lassie is a dog, may be true, but it has not been proved by this argument. It does not follow from its premises. Now, in Aristotelian logic, a true conclusion logically follows from, or is proved by, or is implied by, or is validly inferred from only some premises and not others. The above argument about Lassie is not a valid argument according to Aristotelian logic. And here's why. Its premises do not prove its conclusion. And common sense, or our innate logical sense, agrees. However, modern symbolic logic disagrees. One of its principles is that, quote, if a statement is true, then that statement is implied by any statement whatever, end quote. So, since it is true that Lassie is a dog, dogs have 4 legs, implies that Lassie is a dog. In fact, dogs do not have 4 legs, also implies that Lassie is a dog. You see? Even false statements, even statements that are self-contradictory, like grass is not grass, validly imply any true conclusion in symbolic logic. And a second strange principle is that, quote, if a statement is false, then it implies any statement whatever, end quote, like dogs do not have 4 legs, implies that Lassie is a dog, and also that Lassie is not a dog. and that 2 plus 2 are 4, and that 2 plus 2 are not 4. This principle is often called the paradox of material implication. Ironically, material implication means exactly the opposite of what it seems to mean. It means that the matter or content of a statement is totally irrelevant to its logically implying or being implied by other statements. Common sense says that Lassie being a dog or not being a dog has nothing to do with 2 plus 2 being 4 or not being 4, but that Lassie being a collie and collies being dogs does have something to do with Lassie being a dog, but not in the new logic, which departs from common sense here by totally sundering the rules for logical implication from the matter or content of the propositions involved. Thus, the paradox ought to be called, quote, the paradox of warped material implication, end quote. The paradox can be seen in the following imaginary conversation. So here we go. It's a conversation between a logician and a student. Logician says, so class, you see, if you begin with a false premise, anything follows. The student says, I just can't understand that. Logician says, are you sure you don't understand that? Student, if I understand that, I'm a monkey's uncle. Logician, my point exactly, he he he. Student, what's so funny? Logician, you just can't understand that. The relationship between a premise and a conclusion is called implication. And the process of reasoning from the premise to the conclusion is called inference. In symbolic logic, the relation of implication is called a oh man, there's a mistake right there. The relation of implication, in symbolic logic, the relation of implication is called a, oh man, I really want to get this right. Page 42. All right, hold on. Let's look it up in my, I really want to get this right. I got a hard copy right here. Let's see if page 42 matches. No, it doesn't. Really takes the wind right out of the sails, right? Hold on a second here. In symbolic logic, okay, yeah, here we go. In symbolic logic, the relationship of implication is called a truth functional connective, which means that the only factor that makes the inference valid or invalid, the only thing that makes uh, the only thing that makes it true or false to say that the premise or premises validly imply the conclusion is not at all dependent on the content or matter of any of those propositions, but only whether the premise or premises are true or false and whether the conclusion is true or false. We need better PDFs. Dang it. The last paragraph was cruelly abstract. Let's try to be a little more specific. Okay, here we go. In symbolic logic, 1, if the premise or premises, let's just say the premise for short, are true and the conclusion is true, then the quote, if dot dot dot, then end quote proposition summarizing the implication is true. So if P is true and Q is true, then, quote, if P then Q, end quote, is true. So the example here is, so, quote, if grass is green, then Mars is red. All right. See how that works? That's true. All right. Number two, if the premise is true and the conclusion is false, then the if then proposition summarizing the implications is false. So if P is true and Q is false, then the if P then Q is false. So if grass is green, then Mars is not red is false. Number three, if the premise is false and the conclusion is true, then the if then proposition summarizing the implication is true. If P is false and Q is true, then if P then Q is true. So if grass is purple, then Mars is red is true. If and then number four, if the premise is false and the conclusion is false, then the if then proposition summarizing the implication is true. If P is false and Q is false, then if P then Q is true. So if grass is purple, then Mars is purple is also true. In this logic, if the premise and the conclusion are both false, the premise implies the conclusion. All right, so that was number four. And if the premise is false and the conclusion is true, then the premise also implies the conclusion, like in number three. So if the moon is blue, then the moon is if the moon is blue, then the moon is red. Number four. And if the moon is blue, then the moon is not blue. Number three. This may make some defensible sense mathematically, but it certainly does not make sense commonsensically, for it does not seem to make sense in the real world, which is why I have no idea what the hell this section is about. Nothing I just read in the last like 60 to 90 seconds made any sense to me, but we got through it. Logicians have an answer to the above charge, and the answer is perfectly tight and logically consistent. That is part of the problem. Consistency is not enough. Logic should be not just a mathematically consistent system, but a human instrument for understanding reality, for dealing with real people and things and real arguments about the real world. That is the basic assumption of the old logic. If that assumption is naive and uncritical, unfashionable and unintelligent, well, welcome to Logic for Dummies. Section 4. All of logic in 2 pages. An overview. All right, so this is some basic stuff. This is one of the shortest and simplest sections in this book, but it also is one of the most important, for it is the foundation for everything else in logic. If you do not understand it clearly, you will be hopelessly confused later on. But this does get explained in more detail in the next section. Section 5. The ancient philosophers defined man as the rational animal. To be human is, among other things, to reason, to give reasons for believing things to be true. We can see common forms or structures in all human reasoning, no matter what the contents or objects that we reason about. Logic studies those structures. The fundamental structure of all reasoning is the movement of the mind from premises to a conclusion. The conclusion is what you are trying to prove to be true. The premises are the reasons or evidence for the truth of the conclusion. The 2 basic kinds of reasoning are inductive and deductive. Inductive reasoning reasons from particular premises, like saying, I'm mortal, and you're mortal, and he's mortal, and she's mortal. Everyone's mortal. Usually to a more general or universal conclusion, leading to you saying, all men are mortal, right? Or we could say all humans are mortal. Deductive reasoning reasons from at least one general or universal premise, like saying all men are mortal, usually to a more particular conclusion, like saying I am mortal. Inductive reasoning yields only probability, not certainty. It is not certain that all men are mortal, merely on the basis that 4 men or 4 million are. Deductive reasoning, when correct, yields certainty. Right? It's like saying it is certain that if all men are mortal, and if I am a man, then I am mortal. A deductive argument succeeds in proving its conclusion to be true if and only if 3 conditions are met. These are the 3 checkpoints of any deductive argument. First, all the terms must be clear and unambiguous. If a term is ambiguous, it should be defined to make it clear. Otherwise, the 2 parties to the argument may think they are talking about the same thing when they are not. Second, all the premises must be true. You can seem to prove anything from false premises, like saying all Martians are infallible, and I am a Martian, therefore I am infallible. Third, the argument must be logically valid. That is, the conclusion must necessarily follow from the premises, so that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. I think I'm going to sneeze. All right. Okay, so a term in logic is the subjective or the predicate of a proposition. All right, a declarative sentence, otherwise known. Terms are either clear or unclear. Terms cannot be either true or false. Like saying mortal, the term mortal is neither true nor false, right? The proposition, all men are mortal, is true. And the proposition, some men are not mortal, is false. Next, propositions are declarative sentences. They are either true or false. True in common sense usage means corresponding to reality, and false means the opposite. There is no one simple and infallible way of telling whether any proposition is true or false. There is, however, a fairly simple and truly infallible way of telling whether an argument is valid or invalid. The laws of logic, which that's by using the laws of logic, which you will learn in this book. A deductive argument is logically valid if its conclusion necessarily follows from its premises, invalid if it does not. There are various forms of argument, and each form has its own inherent rules for validity. All the rules for each form of argument are natural to that form of argument and to the human mind. If at any point in this book you think that any of its logical laws contradict what you already implicitly know by innate common sense, please stop and check, for you must be misunderstanding either the laws of logic or what you think common sense tells you, for logic does nothing more. It does nothing more than make explicit the rules everyone knows innately by common sense. Arguments are made up of propositions. Okay? Propositions are premises and a conclusion. That's an argument. And propositions are made up of terms, subject and predicate. All right? Terms are either clear or unclear. Propositions, whether premises or the conclusion, are either true or false. Arguments are either logically valid or invalid. Only terms can be clear or unclear. Only propositions can be true or false. Only arguments can be logically valid or invalid. So the 3 questions you should habitually ask yourself when writing or speaking, and of others when you are reading or listening to them are, ready? Number 1, are the terms all clear and unambiguous? Are the premises all true? And number 3, is the reasoning all logically valid? If the answer to all 3 of these questions is yes, then the conclusion of the argument must be true. So in order to disagree with any conclusion, you must show that there is either 1, an ambiguous term, or 2, a false premise, Or 3, a logical fallacy in the argument such that the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises. You will soon learn the rules for judging that. If you cannot do any of these 3 things, then honesty demands that you admit that the conclusion has been proved to be true. All this applies to deductive arguments only. Inductive arguments do not claim certainty. All right. Section 5, the 3 acts of the mind. This section gives you the outline for all of logic. It is an expansion of the previous section and a summary of the rest of the book. The basis for the science and art of logic is 2 facts: the fact that human beings think and the fact that thought has a structure. That structure can be classified from various points of view and for various purposes. For instance, a physiologist or a physician might distinguish brain activity of the autonomic distinguish brain activity of the autonomic nervous system, which controls breathing, from activity from the frontal lobes, which is where self-conscious thought exists. A moralist might distinguish thoughts that are voluntary and under our control from those that are involuntary, since we are responsible only for what is under our control. A Marxist would distinguish thoughts supposedly produced by a capitalist system from those produced by a communist system. But from the viewpoint of logic, we distinguish 3 kinds of thoughts, 3 acts of the mind. And those are, number 1, simple apprehension, 2, judging, and 3, reasoning. Simple apprehension is a technical term. It means basically conceiving, understanding, or comprehending one object of thought, one concept, such as mortal, or man, or triangle with unequal angles. Animals apparently cannot perform this act of understanding. If they can, they do not express it in words. Computers certainly cannot do this. A computer no more understands what you program into it than a library building understands the information in the books you put into it. Judging is more complex than simple apprehension. Instead of just thinking one concept like man, it relates 2 concepts like man and mortal to each other by predicating one term, the predicate, of the other, the subject, and judging that, e.g., man is mortal or man is not a triangle. As judging is more complex than simple apprehension, reasoning is more complex than judging. As judging moves from one act of simple apprehension, the subject, to another, the predicate, reasoning moves from 2 or more judgments, the premise, the premises, or assumptions, to another, the conclusion. In arguing that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. E.g., all men are mortal, I am a man, therefore I am mortal. Or, a man is not a triangle, and that is a triangle, therefore that is not a man. The mental products produced in the mind by the 3 acts of the mind are 1, concepts, which are the products of conceiving, judgments, which are the products of judging, and arguments, which are the products of reasoning or arguing. Distinguishing between the acts and their objects is not crucial for logic. What is crucial is distinguishing the 3 acts and the 3 objects. These 3 mental entities, concepts, judgments, and arguments, are expressed in logic as terms, propositions, arguments, the most usual form of which is the syllogism. They are expressed in language as, number 1, words or phrases, less than a complete sentence, declarative sentences, paragraphs, or at least 2 or more declarative sentences connected by a word like therefore, which indicates an argument. Ready for some examples? Here we go. Example number 1, man. All right, number 2, Socrates is a man. All right, so we're going examples for a term or words or phrases. Okay, man. Number 2, declarative sentence. Socrates is a man. And then we're going to make a paragraph out of this. All right. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Okay? Logic does not deal with interrogative sentences, questions like, what time is it? Imperative sentences like commands or requests like, pass the mustard, please. Exclamatory sentences like, oh, wow, what a hit. Or performative sentences like, I dub thee knight. But only with declarative sentences, sentences that claim to state a truth. Non-declarative sentences are not propositions. The difference between logic and language is 1. That languages are man-made artifices, and therefore 2. There are many languages that are different in place and time, while 1. Logic is not made but discovered, and 2. There is only one logic. There is no Chinese logic or American logic. There is no 19th century logic or 20th century logic or even masculine logic or feminine logic. Just logic. What is often called feminine logic is intuition rather than logic, a formidable and invaluable power of the mind, but not teachable by textbooks. Like mathematics, logic is objective, universal, and unchangeable in its basic laws or principles. But the forms in which these unchangeable laws of logic are expressed are linguistic forms, and these forms are changing and varied. A term has no structural parts. It is a basic unit of meaning, like the number 1 in math, or like an atom in an old atomic theory, when they believed atoms were unsplittable and had no parts. A proposition term, the subject, has 2 structural parts. The subject term and the predicate term is what you are talking about. The predicate term is what you say about the subject. The words subject and predicate mean the same thing in logic as in grammar. An argument has 2 structural parts, the premises and the conclusion. The premises are the propositions that are assumed. They are the reasons or evidence for the conclusion. The conclusion is the proposition that you are trying to prove. For instance, in the classic example, all men are mortal and I am a man, therefore I am mortal, the argument is everything inside the quotation marks. The 2 premises are, quote, A, all men are A, quote, all men are mortal, end quote, and B, quote, I am a man, end quote. The conclusion is, quote unquote, I am mortal. The subject of the first premise is men, and the predicate is mortal. The subject of the second premise is I, and the predicate is a man. And the subject of the conclusion is I, and the predicate is mortal. Structural parts of a term, none. Structural parts of a proposition, subject term and predicate term. Structural parts of an argument, premise, premises, and conclusion. We can think of the subject and predicate terms as 2 rooms which together make up 1 floor of a building, say a townhouse. Each floor is a proposition. A syllogism is a building with 3 floors. The rooms are the parts of the floors, and the floors are the parts of the building. Subject term, subject term, subject term, subject term, predicate term, predicate term, predicate term, first premise. That's what the hell did I just read? Anyways, these 3 logical entities answer 3 different questions, the 3 most fundamental questions we can ask about anything. Can't believe I just read that whole thing. All right, so these 3 logical, the following 3 logical entities answer 3 different questions, the 3 most fundamental questions we can ask about anything. Number 1, a term answers the question what it is. Number 2, a proposition. Number 3, an argument. Answers the question whether it is, answers the question why it is. Number 1, what are we talking about? Man. Number 2, what are we saying about it? That man is mortal. And number 3, why is it mortal? Because man is an animal and all animals are mortal, therefore man is mortal. Terms, propositions, and arguments reveal 3 different aspects of reality. Terms reveal essences, what a thing is. Propositions reveal existence, whether it is, and arguments reveal causes, why it is. This above is the theoretical basis for the practical art of logic. The practical art consists of discriminating between clear and unclear, ambiguous terms, true and false propositions, and logically valid and invalid arguments. Logic is a practical art as well as a theoretical science. Therefore, it does not only tell us what is, but also what should, fundamental logical structures, but also judges. Dude, I feel like there's a bunch missing out of this page. Dude, I feel like there's a bunch missing out of like this. This is a horrible PDF. Why do I feel like the one that I read out of when I first tried to do this series was a lot better? This is not going the way I thought it would go. I wish the PDF was as readable as the book. Let's see. So I found where I am. So yeah, this is all right. So here we are. God damn it. Terms, propositions, and arguments reveal three different aspects of reality. Terms reveal essences, what a thing is. Propositions reveal existence, whether it is. Arguments reveal causes, why it is. This above is the theoretical basis for the practical art of logic. Okay. The practical art consists of discriminating between clear and unclear, ambiguous terms, true and false propositions, and logically valid and invalid arguments. Logic is a practical art as well as a theoretical science. Therefore, it does not only tell us what is, but also what should be. It not only reveals these three fundamental logical structures, but also judges and tries to improve them. For all three can be either logically good or logically bad. So like there's like whole chunks of that paragraph missing from this PDF. I just want to, anyone watching live, I just want to issue a heartfelt apology for not reviewing the PDF ahead of time. Let's just move on. So for all three can be either logically good or logically bad. Terms are either clear or unclear, ambiguous. Propositions are either true or false. Arguments are either valid or invalid. You will be hopelessly confused for the rest of this book if you do not clearly understand this. Terms are not true or false in themselves. The propositions they are in are true or false. Terms are never valid or invalid. Only arguments are valid or invalid. Terms are only either clear or unclear. Propositions are never clear or unclear. The terms in them are clear or unclear. Propositions are never valid or invalid in themselves. The arguments they are parts of are either valid or invalid. Propositions are only either true or false. Arguments are never clear or unclear. Each of the terms in an argument is clear or unclear. Arguments are never true or false. Each of the propositions in an argument is true or false. Arguments are only valid or are only either valid or invalid. Most, but not all, of logic consists of deciding when arguments are valid. Valid is a technical term in logic. It does not mean just acceptable. For an argument is logically valid when its conclusion necessarily follows from its premises. That is, quote, if the premises are all true, then the conclusion must be true, end quote. That is the definition of a valid argument. An invalid argument is one in which the conclusion does not necessarily follow, even if the premises are true. For instance, this argument is valid. All men are mortal, and I am a man, therefore I am mortal. But this argument is not valid. Okay? All men are mortal, and all pigs are mortal, therefore all pigs are men. It is invalid not just because the conclusion is false, but because the conclusion does not follow from the premises. The following argument is also invalid, even though the conclusion in each premises is true. All men are mortal, and Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates is a man. For this argument has the same logical form as the one above it. It merely replaces pigs with Socrates. An argument may have nothing but true propositions in it and yet be invalid. Like, I exist and the grass is green, therefore Antarctica is cold. An argument may have false propositions in it and yet be logically valid, like saying, I am a cat, and all cats are gods, therefore I am a god. For if both those premises were true, that I am a cat and that all cats are gods, it would necessarily follow that I was a god. An argument that has nothing but true propositions and also is logically valid is the only kind of argument that is worth anything. The only kind that convinces us that its conclusion is true, and the only kind that we can use to convince others that its conclusions are true. If an argument has nothing but clear terms, true premises, and valid logic, its conclusion must be true. If any one or more of these three things is lacking, we do not know whether the conclusion is true or false. It is uncertain. Now, all right, so there is all this nonsense right here. It's supposed to be like a chart, but the chart's not in the PDF. This fucking PDF, I'm sorry to cuss, but this PDF is horrible. Oh God, I'm gonna be honest, this is kind of embarrassing. We're gonna move past this what's supposed to be this chart. So it's basically a chart that's, so if the terms are clear and the premises are true and the logic is valid, then the conclusion is true. If the terms are clear and the premises are true and the logic is invalid, then the conclusion is uncertain. And if the terms are clear, the premises are false, and the logic is true, and the logic is valid, then the conclusion is uncertain. If the terms are clear and the premises are false, and the logic is invalid, then the conclusion is uncertain. All right. If the terms are unclear and the premises are true and the logic is valid, then the conclusion is uncertain. If the terms are unclear and the premises are true and the logic is invalid, then the conclusion is uncertain. All right. And if the terms are unclear and the premises are false and the logic is valid, Can you guess what the conclusion is? If you're playing at home and you said that the conclusion is uncertain, then you would be true. Then you would be correct. And last, if the terms are unclear and the premises are false and the logic is invalid, can you guess what the conclusion is? If you said uncertain, you win a brand new car. Not for me. I don't have a car to give you. Logic gives us rules. Excuse me. Logic gives us rules for deciding when an argument is valid or invalid. It also gives us ways of defining terms so as to make them clear and unambiguous. Unfortunately, logic cannot give us any one way to tell whether any proposition is true. There are many ways of finding truth: sensation, intuition, reasoning, experimentation, authority, experience, etc. By the way, what is truth is a very easy question to answer, as we shall see in chapter 6, section 2. We all know what the word means. It means knowing or saying what is, right? Aristotle defined truth in words of one syllable. Quote, he said, if a man says of what is that, if a man says of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not, if he speaks the truth, if he says of what is that is not, or of what is not that it is, he does not speak the truth. End quote. Defining truth is easy, finding it is harder, and being certain when you have it is hardest of all. Because there are three acts of the mind and three corresponding logical entities, and those entities are terms, propositions, and arguments. There are three basic questions we should habitually ask in each of the four basic language arts of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The more we habitually ask these three questions of ourselves when speaking, when speaking or writing, and of others when listening or reading, the more critical and logical our thinking is. In fact, this is probably the single most practical paragraph in this book. The questions are: what do you mean? This is when you ask somebody to define their terms. Okay. Number two, what's the point? Okay, that's when you're demanding for them to tell you what their conclusion is. And then why? That's when you need proof. You're asking them to prove it. When you want to make an unanswerable argument, you must be sure of three things. You need to be sure that your terms are clear. You need to be sure your premises are true. Be sure your logic is valid. All right? Those are your three things. If you fulfill all three of these conditions, you have proved your conclusion. If you want to answer someone else's argument, you must find in it one of these three following errors. Number one, a term used ambiguously. Number two, a false premise. Number three, a logical fallacy, an invalid argument, a conclusion that does not necessarily follow from the premises. All right? If you cannot find any one of these three, you must admit that the conclusion is true. For this is the power of logic. If the terms are unambiguous and the premises are true and the logic is valid, then the conclusion really is true and has been proved to be true. Oops. All right, so next is another whole thing. I think we're just going to call the reading there for tonight. All right, and then next week I'll come back with a better PDF, hopefully. And gosh, man, I had a better PDF last year when I first tried to do this, so I got to find that one, and perhaps we'll scrap this and we'll do this all over again. Let's go over to the chat, see if there's anything over there. Oh, hey, Rip's in the chat. Logic is logic, symbolic is symbolic. Does logic have room for paradox? And then Rip asks, logic must be true, but truth can be paradoxical. It's interesting. Let's see. Rip is ripping it up. He says there is a reason we used to be assumed innocent until proven otherwise. And the burden of proof was with the ones accusing, and it stems from personal liability of the ones accusing. But the personal liability will always be the state of reality. Interesting. So that went on longer than I thought it would. I'm going to be honest with you. But we're going to keep going on. I'm going to review this and see what direction I want to take this in, because this is a very long book. And quite honestly, when I went over it and I thought to myself, maybe I'll just do every single section, one section every week. I thought to myself, that'd be great. That would be pretty cool if I want to spend the next 4 months doing just one book, because there's 16 sections and that's 16 weeks. That's roughly 4 months. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm not interested in doing that. So I'm going to go over this book and I'm going to find the most interesting and the most, probably the most important things that I think that should be on the channel. And we're gonna kind of cherry pick things here. But I encourage everybody to go get their own copy of this book and read it for themselves. Okay. And I think we're definitely going to cover logical fallacies. Dude, I'm going to be honest with you. Like the last 20 minutes of this live stream, I have never felt more failed than I have in the last 20 minutes of this live stream. But I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm just saying that this PDF fucking failed me big time. Big time. And I apologize if you sat through this and I can't even I have no excuse. Like I should have looked over the PDF first. I trusted before I verified. And that was, dare I say, probably little I don't know, knee jerk, a little illogical, maybe, perhaps. Maybe I should have verified before I trusted it. I'll find a better one, make sure that in the future, as long as we have, I wish I had my book cam set up, but I don't. And I'd be able to show you what's missing out of this PDF and why I feel so fucking betrayed. And so anyways, what are we doing here, B? It's been a long week, guys. We're working hard behind the scenes here. Thank you, Jerry and Jonna, for being amazing friends and helping me get my act together. If you noticed on the channel, there's a lot of clips and a lot of shorts being uploaded all over the place. And trying to get the word out there about what's going on this channel and trying to get some of the more coherent sections of some of the last 6 weeks work going over the most dangerous superstition out there to more people. If you have not picked up your own copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, you most definitely should go to therosechannel.com and order your own copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition. Get a physical copy because that PDF sucks. That's what got me so down about this live stream tonight. So I just dealt with 6 weeks of really terrible PDF in a row, but it's the only PDF in existence. You can't find a better PDF of The Most Dangerous Superstition. I have a feeling that I'll be able to find a much better PDF version of this book if I just do a little bit of digging. We'll be able to get there. So go get your own copies of these books, man. Go. And do not get a copy of... Actually, I'm not going to say that for posterity, because right now, at time of recording, the copy of this PDF on my website is this copy. So I don't want people to download that. So I'm gonna figure it out. I'll get it done. But be on the lookout for some clips and everything like that. Share them around. The shorts. Go on YouTube, watch the shorts a bunch of times. That'll help. Get the word out about the channel and get this information in front of more people. That's what the goal is here. And and for the most part, will always be the goal. Is just get the information in front of people. Share this around. I'm very rough around the edges. I know that. I'm the first person to admit it, but I enjoy doing this, and I think it's beneficial. And yeah, so reflections about this. I don't know, like, is it my own ideological bias that's getting me kind of, leaning toward some of the things that I already see Kreeft is like leaving out about like government authority? Or will we find out later in the book that he does actually take them to task in a certain way? He's a very religious man, of course. It seems to me that he's coming from a very theological point of view in this book, with all the mention of religion and the use of God in the examples, which I have no aversion to at all. I'm just saying, I reading this information from this book is not in any way, shape, or form an endorsement of any religion. If you practice spirituality, you don't need religion to be spiritual. You just don't. You really just don't. And by religion, I mean like organized religion. If you're a Christian or, whatever, like you do that in your own time, that's great. You don't need organized religion like a priest telling you what to do to be spiritual and to have a connection with God or the creator of the universe. You don't need religion to be moral. Certainly, you don't need religion to be moral and to understand that morality is objective. You don't need any of that. You don't need religion for any of that. Religion and morality are not tied at the hip, you know? They're not, they do not always have to go together. And so, yeah, I think that's a good message. I endorse that message. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have said it. And, you know, I like the idea that Kreeft's book has never been made in audio form. There isn't one that exists. I've never been able to find one. There's some people out there that speak about Kreeft's book and they recommend it. My friend Richard Grove recommends it. And that's how I found out about this book in the first place anyways, was through him. And so, is that too big of a name drop? Is that awkward? I don't care. He's my friend. Uh, and a mentor, by the way. Awesome dude. Go check out Grand Theft World, the podcast Grand Theft World, and see what this guy is, or Tragedy and Hope, Project Constellation, like an OG of like internet space. Anyways, enough about that. Richard told me about this book, and that's why I have it. I looked for an audiobook because I drive around. I wanted to listen to it and learn, and I couldn't find one. And I was like, well, I should just do it. So that's why we're here. And that's why we'll continue to do this. I'm just going to have to curate for the audience the most, the best out of this book, because I don't know what is it? It's July 11th. If I did all 16 sections or chapters out of this book, one every week, I mean, we'd be here until November doing this, and I'm not ready to do that. You might have noticed at the beginning that there was no music. That has nothing. I just wanted to get to the material quicker. I just wanted to get to the material quicker. That's all. I feel like I feel like spending 5 or 10 minutes right at the beginning of the stream like turns a lot of people away. I just want to get to the material, and then we can take the promotion of all the content. We can take the promotion of everything else um, at the end. We can make that happen at the end here. And so, yeah, if you're interested in more of this, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Leave a comment on the video. Go to voluntaryistacademy.com. We can do that now, I think. And we can go to voluntaryistacademy.com and check out all the old stuff there. Sign up to the newsletter, which I keep forgetting I'm supposed to be doing. You can become a sponsor for $3 a month. But it's more important to me that you subscribe to the channel, you like the videos and comment on them and get the algorithm. Like, oh, mighty algorithm, please, mighty algorithm, Please, for the love of God, validate me with your ever-loving promotion of my material. But if you want to help this channel go and grow, keep going and growing, you can sub to the channel and do all that stuff, you know. And in any case, I'm going to sign off now. James Cordiner here, Voluntaryist Academy, voluntaristacademy.com. And yeah, so thanks for being here. I'll talk to you guys later. Oh yeah, one more thing. You own yourself, period. Peace. Voluntaryist Academy. Please subscribe.